Imagine what we could learn if we could talk to a beluga.
Today I'm talking to Doug Allan. Doug is an award-winning natural history photographer, documentary filmmaker, diver, author, and public speaker. Doug's photographic awards include 8 Emmys, 5 BAFTAs, and 5 Wildscreen Pandas. In his 35 years of filming, he's been involved with more than 65 films, freelancing for the BBC, Discovery, National Geographic, and others. He was principal cameraman on many prestigious award-winning programs, making over 25 trips to the Antarctic and more than 30 across the Arctic, filming for series including Frozen Planet, Ocean Giants, Human Planet, Planet Earth, The Blue Planet, and Life in the Freezer. Although Doug has filmed worldwide, he is a specialist at filming underwater frozen worlds and has a deep love for the polar regions. Doug is uniquely positioned to give us his take on climate change and also entertain us with stories about encounters with polar bears, speaking to a beluga whale, and getting a hug from a walrus. Doug is touring Ireland with his beautiful imagery and wonderful stories on his It's a Wrap tour. So check out the show notes for details. A perfect treat for any nature lover. I'm delighted to be speaking to Doug Allan today, who is a wonderful wildlife photographer. Where are you speaking from today, Doug?
I'm speaking to you from where I live, which is in Bristol. But funnily enough, I do have a little cottage not far from you. I've got a little cottage in Connemara, which I'm coming out to at the end of this month, over near Letterfrack. So it's right out on the west coast, and it's a beautiful spot. Looking forward to it.
You've got a tour coming up. It's a Wrap tour, which is travelling through Ireland, and it is in Galway in the town hall on the 9th of November, I believe.
Yep. Yeah, I'm doing quite a few gigs in Ireland. I'm doing, I think, something like 14 theatres, but I'm also doing a couple of schools as well, up in Northern Ireland, actually. And it's a wrap. I do a theatre tour roughly every year, although it was interrupted by COVID, obviously. But it's a good chance to go out on the road and talk about my experiences filming wildlife and talking about the issues of climate change round about them, but behind the scenes stories, so to speak. Those 10 minutes that they bring up at the end of all the big episodes on the big wildlife series, those 10 minutes that go behind the scenes. Well, imagine an extended version of that where I talk about the various shoots that I've been on sometimes over the 30 odd years that I've been filming around the world. So I really enjoy it. It's a great chance to get out and meet the public, and I love to see the range of people that I get, from 5-year-olds to, well, however old people want to come along.
All ages.
Exactly.
And it's great to have somebody inspirational. You've filmed for Blue Planet and all those frozen places. So I think when you were young, you were inspired by Jacques Cousteau. Maybe we're around the same age, as I remember those programs, and they really were the only thing at the time on TV that was really wow.
Oh, yeah. People have so much choice nowadays, but back in those days, as you say, nature slots that were shown, even the Jacques Cousteau programme, I think, went out on the BBC as part of another series. They did absolutely inspire me. In fact, before even his television series, he wrote a wonderful book called The Silent World, which was published in 1957. And I remember this book appearing as a condensed book in the Reader's Digest condensed book series, and my father used to buy those. And I probably read The Silent World when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And it just fired up my imagination. It was such a good time, interesting time to be at that sort of formative years in your life, because we were doing things underwater which haven't been duplicated until recently. People went to the deepest part of the ocean in 1960, and we didn't go back there until 5 years ago when James Cameron went down in his submersible. But at the same time, we were reaching out into space. There was all the Man in Space program, Man into the Moon. All that happened through the 60s. So it was a wonderful decade for for analog exploration, but also for seeing the world, seeing the big picture of the world. Biology as a science moved away from looking at how individual animals worked. It began to look at how whole ecosystems worked, how the ocean worked, how the forests worked, how the energy flowed through that system. And it was because of that, I think, and because of the man leaving the earth, human beings leaving the earth, I think we had an interest in the status of the whole earth and how it worked. And basically, environmentalism grew up through the late 60s and through the 70s. And it really did reach a peak, and it was enormously effective, in that 10-year period. The shame is that we lost it then for quite a few decades, but now we're starting to pick it up again. We're starting to realise the importance of natural systems and how much we should be looking after them.
Yeah, I mean, before we started before I pressed record, you were talking about driving past a reservoir that has dropped so much that you reckoned they had lost how many tons of water in the last couple of months?
Well, there's a reservoir that I drive past regularly, and obviously it's an artificial lake effectively, and it has a dam down one side. And I could look and see where the normal level of water is in the reservoir, and I could see that the normal level had dropped by about 2.5 meters. And so I Googled the surface area of the reservoir, and from that I was able to work out how many cubic meters of water had been lost. And a cubic meter of water weighs 1 ton. And I reckon it had lost getting on for 15 million tons of water in the drought that we've had over here in the last month or so. So, when you imagine that happening across several of the big reservoirs, in England and the south of England especially, it's no wonder that the farmers and the public at large are getting concerned about the lack of water, and that's coming on top of these record temperatures that we had last month, where England managed to record over 40 degrees centigrade for the first time. So I think it could be shaping up to be a very warm, dry, record-breaking summer. And it just, it makes you, also I was talking to friends who just come back from holiday in the Mediterranean, and for them it was almost too warm. I mean, Ireland may never have those problems on the west coast. I think you've got this wonderful oceanic climate where rain is never far away, although you can have very good spells of weather too. But generally, the weather is changing around the world.
We can see the weather changing over here too. Your specialism is diving, and especially in those icy places in the world. And if you just look up some of Doug's work, it's really absolutely beautiful. And I was watching one of your little clips on the website today, and you just threw away this comment, which I'd like to ask you about. And you said, "Are these animals trying to talk to us?" What did you mean by that?
Well, this all came from, we did a series which has recently been replayed on BBC Two called Ocean Giants, and that was all about finding out about whales. And we spoke to some fascinating whale biologists. Among them were people who were studying the sounds that dolphins and bigger whales make. And we're only just beginning to understand what these sounds could be used for. And there's certainly one scientist, Denise Hertzing, who works a lot with spotted dolphins off the Bahamas. And she is convinced that their level of communication between them it's not just functional. It's not just making sounds to find schools of fish under the sea or stuff like that. It's actually, high level communication between them. And I was diving in the presence of belugas up in the Arctic. Now, belugas are white dolphins, which you only find in the Arctic, and they're extremely vocal. When you get close, when there's a pod of beluga come close to you, you can hear them long before you can see them. They used to be called sea canaries by the whalers who went up there, because the whalers in their wooden boats, when they were down below decks, they could hear the noises that the whales were making, because the sound would just pass from the water through the wooden hulls, and you could hear it inside the boat. And they didn't know what was causing these sounds. I think they eventually probably put two and two together with the belugas. But anyway, they gave belugas the name sea canaries, because when you're with them, it really is like being in the middle of a flock of birds. They're chirping and whistling and making all sorts of noises, just like birds would make. And I was in the company of this single beluga at one point, and this guy was making the noises that I could hear, because I knew there weren't many other ones around. And this beluga came, and they're very curious. And actually, the way to get close to them in the water is you don't have to dive with them. You just lie on the surface and you make noises. You hum down your snorkel and you make a noise into the water. And they, I think, hear that noise and they come over out of curiosity to see who or what is making this noise. So I'm lying in the water, and the beluga is within 2 meters of me, and he's looking at me and he's making all these noises. And at one point, they have this big domed forehead called a melon on their head. It's a big structure. And in that melon, that's where they make a lot of the noises, because when they make these noises, you don't see air coming out of their blowhole or their mouth like we are. They make the sounds by squeezing air through very narrow channels within the melon, and these channels have valves in them, and by restricting the channels and squeezing the valves in different directions, they can make the different frequencies. So I'm looking at this whale, and suddenly across the melon, the melon changes shape. It can become more prominent or more flattened, depending on what noises they're making. And I was looking at this beluga, and suddenly there were 2 or 3 very distinct creases developed laterally across the melon. And I looked at this and I thought, they're exactly the same sort of creases that I would have on my forehead if I was talking to someone who wasn't understanding what I was saying. You would crease your forehead and say, why don't you understand what I'm saying? And I thought, I wonder if this beluga is making the sounds that it would use to communicate with other belugas, but he's getting no response from me, and he's just getting frustrated. Why can't you understand what I'm trying to tell you? And I know that as I say, belugas make extremely complex ranges of sounds, and scientists are busy with some big project money trying to decipher the language that dolphins, that whales use to speak to each other. And it also led me on to thinking that here we go, spending billions of dollars going to Mars, for example, and dropping the latest in technology, wonderful technology, vehicles that can trundle around on Mars, sending back fantastic pictures, looking for the smallest sign of evidence of life. And the ultimate with any of these extraterrestrial explorations is to find some form of alien life on another planet. And we've got this alien species on our own planet that's clearly highly intelligent, clearly lives in a world that we are just poking the surface at, the deep sea, the ocean. And imagine what we could learn if we could talk to a beluga and understand what it was saying. Imagine what we would, what we could learn from it. And interestingly, marine mammals in some cases are now being used to collect oceanographic data. Seals which come ashore at regular haul-out spots, scientists have attached instrument packages to them while they're ashore, and then they let the animal go out. And then when the animal comes back, or while it's out there doing its behavior, all the data from its dive is transmitted when it's at the surface, breathing, recovering from one dive. All the data from the previous dive is sent up to a satellite, and the scientist can download it, and he can get what's called the dive profile, not just the depth that it goes to, but with current scientific satellite tags, you can build up a three-dimensional picture of what the animal is doing underwater, how shallow, what's the angle of its dive, whether it's turning left or right, and you can get all this data and build up this three-dimensional graph of what the animal's been doing and what it may be doing with other animals that it's diving with. And this is opening up all kinds of new information about the world underneath the water.
Yeah, how wonderful. It's a bit like sort of trying to translate hieroglyphics or something. Hopefully if you get one or two little clues that match, and then you'll go, oh my goodness, this.
No, exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. And now with computer, able to feed in dolphin sounds into a computer with the suitable algorithms on it, you can do an enormous number of calculations looking for it. And also we've got other scientists have worked on different languages around the world and been discovering the common roots of how languages are connected, and therefore we can look for this kind of connection possibly in those sounds. I mean, it all sounds really science-y fiction-y, but I think 10 years is a long time in science, and these scientists are working with that sort of time frame in mind. And when you think what we didn't know 10 or 15 years ago compared to what we know now, then it could be that we'll make the breakthrough within the next few years. It'd be great to be there.
It would be amazing, wouldn't it? And technology is moving so fast. I know you've got wonderful stories. I mean, I suppose the one that maybe if you could quickly tell the listeners when you were cuddled by a walrus.
Oh, I wouldn't say cuddled. Well, that was another one where I was snorkeling, just on a snorkel, no scuba, off the ice, off the edge of the ice in the Arctic. And I was actually out trying to catch some pictures of guillemots, which were diving. These are Arctic guillemots, and they were paddling around. And then occasionally they would synchronously dive down into depths and then come back up. And so I was looking for shots just as they left the surface. So I got a few pictures, and then I was just treading water. I was not really lying on top of the water, but I was just treading water so I could put my head up and look around looking for another group that I could paddle over and maybe get a picture of. And when I was treading water like that, suddenly something grabbed me around the thighs. It was just like someone had come up from underneath and wrapped their arms around my thighs. And I looked down, and there was a head of a walrus literally almost underneath one armpit. And my reaction was to swing the camera around and kind of push hard on the walrus's head. And that the walrus let me go, and it swam away a couple of meters and then turned around and headed away. And by that time I was heading back to the edge of the ice. And what the walrus had effectively done was confuse me for a seal. Most of the time walruses feed on clams, mussels in the muddy bottoms, but occasionally it may be the ice on the top of the water prevents them accessing the shallow areas that they want to get. So they'll paddle off into deeper water, and they'll look for seals that they can attack. And the easiest seal to attack is one which is sleeping on the surface. And when a seal goes to sleep, they go vertical in the water. You'll see them off seal colonies off the Irish coast. If you see a little head sticking up with its nose in the air, that's probably a seal sleeping. They just sleep like bottles, bobbing up and down. And the walrus must have been probably patrolling around on the surface looking for a little head bobbing up, and it saw mine. And then they dive down a fair distance away. They dive down underneath. And when they think, or when they know they're underneath the seal, they look up, and of course they can see the seal silhouette against the bright water above. And then up they come, grab the seal and take it down. But normally they would take the seal quite high. This one walrus took me around the thighs, and because I had my hands up close to the water surface, luckily my hands weren't by my side, because I had grabbed, if I pinned my arms to my side, it would have been a real problem. As it is, if they pin the seal's flippers to its side, which prevents the seal swimming away, then quite often they kill the seal they will bend over, the walrus will put its lips against the head of the seal, and basically they suck the seal's brains out, which is
it's a terrible death.
You feel pretty quickly, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I was lucky that it took me lower, and maybe it recognised the brainless Scotsman when it smelt one or saw one. But I think the main reason it didn't press home is, it didn't carry on, although it might, all it needed to do was hold on tight and take me down, and that would have been it. But I think the fact that I reacted in an unseal-like manner by hitting it on the head with a camera, that meant it. Let me go, and that was it. It's still the one that gives me, lets me think, because, as I say, if it had held on and just taken me down half a metre, only on snorkel, completely unexpected, then it could have been a very different story.
Yeah, it would have been curtains. It's a funny-ish story now, but definitely not funny at the time.
No, it certainly, it was only when I was back on the ice edge that, my heart started going. And it was when I was talking to my Inuit friends later, they told me about this refined technique that the walrus had for finishing off the seal. That was when I thought,
lovely. So you've so many lovely stories, but I'd really love to hear about your favourite animal, if it is the narwhal.
Narwhal is certainly one of them. I mean, they're very charismatic. You've got here a small whale, a small toothed whale, which lives only in the Arctic, not quite circumarctic. It's more common in the Canadian Arctic. And its main distinguishing feature is that the males, although there are some females, but the males carry a tusk. They have a tusk, which is a modified tooth, grows out of their upper jaw, and it grows through their upper jaw. And in a big male narwhal might be 5.5 meters long, and it could have a 3 meter long tusk sticking out the front of it. And this tusk is made of ivory, just like elephant tusk is derived from a tooth. And they have this lovely spiral to them. They've got fine ridges running along them, but the whole tusk kind of has a gentle spiral that aims towards the point. And to be honest, we suspect that this is like a secondary sexual characteristic. It's like deers on antlers on a deer, for example. Because when you think about it, if it was something that was really important for feeding, for example, then the females would have it as well. But when you get something which is pretty much exclusively just the males have it, then it's almost a safe bet that sex has got something to do with it. And there have been observations of narwhals coming together at the surface. Males and females tend to keep to their respective groups. There have been times when groups of male narwhals have been seen, lifting their tusks in the air and slowly moving them around and crossing tusks very gently with other narwhals. And I've seen one narwhal, a male narwhal, kind of lay its tusk across the back of another male and tap it a couple of times, quite gently. But it may be that the male narwhals, simply by having a long tusk and by showing it to the others in the group, that might give them some kind of breeding priority over it. Because it could be that groups of males get together, like a lot of whales, that groups of males gather around one female and basically harass it, but then have sex multiple times with it. And it could be that the bigger narwhals, by having the bigger tusk, simply get more chances and have more chance of reproductive success. But as I say, they're very charismatic. They're not easy to get close to. The conditions in the Arctic with good visibility, where you can get with them underwater, that window of opportunity is quite narrow, because as the ice breaks up and the open water becomes accessible with the narwhals, then also that's the time when the sunlight, 24-hour sunlight, the amount of sunlight coming down on the water is at a peak. So you've only got about a couple of weeks when the ice starts to open up and the water's clear. And then after 2 to 3 weeks, the plankton just blooms and it becomes like pea soup, and you can hardly see your subjects. So you've got that quite narrow window to look after them, to look for them. But as with all mammals, all animals perhaps, there's a range of personalities, a range of wariness that mammals have. And And some mammals, some whales, do just by their nature end up more curious, more friendly than others. But it would be nice to think that somewhere up there there's a friendly male narwhal that would give me, 10 minutes in its company with a camera in my hand. I was befriended by a female on a shoot in one of my early days. I got in the water with a bunch of females, and this one just absolutely locked onto me. And I could snorkel down, 5 or 6 meters down, and she would be literally right by my side, and she would stick with me, and we'd come back up to the surface, and she would just be there with her pup, with her calf rather. And the same thing happens. I've experienced that with seals and humpback whales and other mammals in the water. And that's what's great about underwater, isn't it? Because underwater, you're kind of forced into a proximity to your subjects that you don't have on land. On land, we can see our animals from a long way away. We can take precautions so that we're not seen. We can film from a blind, this kind of thing. But you can't do that underwater. When the animal can see, when you can see the animal can see you. And often it can sense you from much further away before you even see it. And then, of course, it's no use filming an animal which is at the limit of visibility. You have to get closer to it. So underwater needs a whole different techniques to get close. And part of that is feeling at home in the water and just, giving off the right vibes. I mean, I do firmly believe topside and underwater, but how you behave, what is going through your mind is crucially important. If you go for a walk across the Burren and you want to see the wildlife, then be persistent, walk slowly, and almost walk as if it didn't matter if you saw something or not. I was once told by an old friend who was a poacher, actually, in Scotland, and he used to say, he said, I could walk through a field full of rabbits or sheep or cows, and if I don't watch them, they're not bothered. But the minute you make eye contact with them, they're off, And so you can do the same underwater, you can do the same walking in a wild space. You can be kind of alert and looking around and feeling around. But if you let your gaze go past the animal that you might want to see and then gently come back to it and move it around, then actually the animal will quite often stay where it is, or it will certainly react in a very different way to if you suddenly stop and bring all your attention to it. So I like underwater because I think underwater in particular, you really have to be at one with the environment and at one with the animals that you want to approach. That will give you by far your best chance to get something. But the same goes for topside, whether it's with polar bears or any other Arctic animals.
Yeah, I think your energy, the animals read body language and energy and everything so much more than us that we don't understand. And you can see it. I've learned a lot from, even though I've worked with horses my whole life, but the last couple of years I've learned so much more from one particular horse about energy and communication. Yeah.
But you can do the same with people, can't you? You get a bunch of people. Some people, they just put you a bit on edge because they're all just that way. They don't make you relax, whereas other people they do it. I don't know. It's a bit of a gift that some people have to an extent.
Yeah, I think everybody can get it though. I think it's practice as well, and I think it's about just, isn't it, what people say, being present and not having this constant shopping list in your head, because the animal's looking at you thinking, oh, she's got a big shopping list in her head or whatever, and she's actually not here, kind of thing. But I'm sure underwater, the vibrations, everything, your communication, everything is so instant. Yeah.
And remember that things like dolphins can buzz you from afar with their sonar and make all kinds of assessments about your muscle tone, about how much activity is going on in your head, etc., etc.
Yeah,
and if it's the right activity, then they're liable to come in. If it's the wrong one, they will go. But this is all partly about familiarity, isn't it? With nature and connection with nature and feeling that you're somewhere different and somewhere special and somewhere where you belong. And I think that is one of the key things that people should be encouraged, especially youngsters, and many of them are getting it now. And maybe COVID was quite useful because it gave people that chance to go out into nature. But I think we need to capitalize on that and encourage it and make it as possible and encourage it at all sorts of levels in the schools and with outings, what people do at weekends. It's about encouraging and making wildness accessible to people and encouraging them to go out and enjoy it in all kinds of different ways. But one of the ways is just to go and quietly enjoy it. And that's why the wild spaces in Ireland are particularly important, whether it's Connemara or the Burren or anywhere where you can get back into the rawest nature that you can, and not just on the good days, but on the wild days when you're getting blown off the cliffs and all that sort of stuff. That's when nature comes alive too.
Isn't it? Maybe you could tell us about your most dramatic day in the ice, or perhaps an animal that you met. That's a different question, or perhaps an encounter. I'm not sure. Whichever you like.
Well, as I say, my favourite topside animal is probably, polar bear. And I always remember the first time I properly saw one, because there are some places you can go and be guaranteed, to see a polar bear. But the first time I went, I was looking for them up in the Canadian Arctic, and I was out with an Inuit guide, and we'd been snow machining around for 3 or 4 days and really hadn't seen any bears at all. This was in March. I hadn't seen any bears at all, which is not uncommon, as I later came to realise. But then we'd stopped for the last brew of the day, the last cup of tea. We stopped, and the guy got his stove out and cranked it up and put some ice lumps in the kettle and was just bringing the kettle to the boil to have the last cup of tea. And it was quite late in the day. The sun was quite low on the horizon, and we were just standing there looking around, and about maybe 150 yards away, this polar bear came out from behind a lump of ice. And I was cold. It had been minus 30, 35 all day driving around looking for these things, not seeing very much. And the first impression I had when the bear came out was just how this animal belonged there and how confident it felt. And it was quite a big male, and the sun was almost behind it, and you could see the breath coming out of his mouth, backlit. And when I put the binoculars on it, you could see the slight frost on the hairs on its back, just with the sunlight coming through them. But as I say, this overall impression that I had of this animal just belonging there. Here we were having a brew, looking forward to getting back to the tent, me cold and aware of the fact that, over the 3 days, I don't think we'd seen a living thing. There had been no birds, hadn't seen any seals. All the seals were in the water. And here was this big fat polar bear that obviously was making a living, no problem at all, in this environment. And it glanced across at us, and then it looked back, and then it just turned and ambled off into the sunset. And as I say, you couldn't hope for a better first view of a polar bear. Yeah. And I realised at that point why it is quite justifiably, why it's the first polar animal that comes to most people's mind. It's either a polar bear or a penguin. I've spent time with them both, and they're both memorable, but for very different reasons. And since then, luckily, all my times with polar bears, all the days that I've spent with them, have just underscored that first impression that I had about their power, about their intelligence, about their survivability, and about their cleverness, and just how much they need to know to make a living in such a harsh environment, in such a changeable environment. I don't know anywhere else where in March you're driving around over something that feels totally solid, and by August you'll need a boat to get back there. It's just changed. It's a bit like, maybe the Brazilian Pantanal, for example, which, the flooded forest, where you can walk around in the dry season, and in the wet season, everything's under a couple of meters of water. But the Arctic somehow just, it's specialness, it's the emptiness of it, it's the hugeness of the skies, and it is quite a hostile place for people, for human beings to live. It's exciting.
Have you any advice for a budding wildlife photographer that might be listening to the show?
There's a big difference between shooting wildlife stills and trying to make wildlife movies. They demand you put a different hat on your head. For the stills, you're looking for a series of images that, are instant, to sum everything up. With making movies, it's about telling stories, and it's about learning the grammar of filmmaking. You can teach yourself with either of them. In fact, it's never been easier in a way with digital technology. When I started, it was the days of film, and I started in film in the Antarctic. Now, some films we could develop ourselves in the Antarctic. Other films, if you shot a film in April, a roll of stills film in April, it would be November, and the next ship call after winter, of course, you could send it out. It would have to go back to UK. It might not make it back by the end of that summer. It might be the end of summer after. Basically, you might be waiting up to 2 years before you actually saw your pictures. Whereas now, digital, really, you can go out, you can take it, and you can think that's not quite right, I can do better. So really it's about, in both cases, it's about taking the time to learn what controls you have on your camera, which can make the difference between a good shot and a mediocre shot. And that sometimes can come down to what settings you put on the camera. Sometimes it comes down to the composition. It's amazing how, just a simple rule like, if you're going to photograph an animal, you usually get level with their eyes. So you want a nice shot of your pet dog, get down on one knee, lie on it if it's a small dog, get level with its eyes. That just immediately improves the picture. And the same goes with kids. Get down to their eye level, you get a much better picture. So it's partly composition, it's partly that. There are heaps of information out there on the internet. With the thing with movie making or making a living as a camera person is that, again, it's quite different. There are lots of wildlife productions being made, and the normal way it works is that when you are in demand, the production company will come to you, they will say, I want you to film so-and-so, I want you to go to this place for 2-3 weeks, and we'll pay you so much a day while you try to get it. They take all the risk. You go there, do the very best you can. If you come back with nothing, you'll still get paid. But if you come back with the most wonderful footage, they will own it all in perpetuity. So in other words, you've been paid while you make it, but that's the end of your commercial interest. With stills, it's much more common you won't get paid so much while you make it or while you try to get the pictures, but you will own the pictures. So therefore, those pictures, if they're good, they could be very valuable for years and years and years. So you build up a library of your own, but then nowadays you can back it up with talks that you give like I do. And I couldn't give the presentations that I do unless I had all these stills that I had accumulated over the years behind the scenes, some of the animals themselves, but I can mix the two. So my advice to anyone, if you're a stills photographer, then take the best stills that you can, look to improve your technique, look around at good magazines that have good wildlife pictures in them, and still the obvious ones are National Geographic, things like that, BBC Wildlife. There are others. Try to, look at a picture that you like and ask yourself why you like it. Is it because of the composition, or is it the depth of field, the way that the subject stands out from the rest of the background? Learn how you can apply those techniques to yourself. Think about when you take pictures. Often it's interesting if you think about, instead of just going for one picture of an animal doing something, imagine that you'd been given an assignment by a magazine article to do a bigger piece about this animal. So you want different shot sizes. You might want shots of the environment where that animal lives. You know, you might want shots of some scientific work that might be going on with it. You can access people ringing it or something like that. So think about making, you know, a story, and also maybe think about writing yourself round about that story, because writing a story means you can write that story specific to your photographs, so you can, you know, give it more chance of being published, which, you know, in a magazine and things, so you'll get some money back from it. But it also just increases your awareness of the potential of photography. So I would say study magazines which do photo stories rather than just individual pictures. Think about putting your pictures with a library. There are several libraries. Nature PL is one here in Bristol. And basically a library, if your pictures are good enough, they will take your pictures, they will sell them on your behalf. Now, that doesn't mean that you lose copyright. Your pictures are still yours, but that picture library will sell them, will negotiate a fee, will deal with all the rights which are being sold. And every quarter, they will send you a check or the sales that they have made, or a percentage of the sales that they have made. And if you get a good relationship with a library and get to the stage where you have several hundred photographs with them, then that could well bring you an income of, you know, £1,000 or a couple of £1,000 every quarter. And this all adds up, because as a freelance, which you almost inevitably will be, your income will need to come from several different sources, so to speak. If you want to get into movie business, then there's a lot of tech stuff these days to go with the cameras. But again, you can teach yourself how to make a movie by studying movies that are made. Take a program, take one episode from a big wildlife program and choose one particular sequence that you like, and then break that sequence down. Get yourself a shorthand that allows you to watch it until the picture changes, and then write a quick description. And then at that point, if you combine that with reading on how to make films, you'll then realize how important big close-ups are when you're following an animal, let it walk out of the shot. You'll learn to be an editor. And learning, actually, the person that you film for, when you're out in the field filming, you're filming for the editor. You are creating the building blocks, which that editor will use to craft together to make something that looks seamless. And your job is to give him as many stylish, technically spot-on building blocks as he or she needs. And for them to arrive at the time when they do the cutting and not be limited by, God, I wish we had more shots of this or more shots of that. And that will depend on you being enough of an editor in your head in the field to know that you might get 90% of the shots that you need in 10% of the time that you've got. But those 10% of the really crucial shots that will make the sequence sing, those are the ones you're going to have to work with. And they might be close-ups, they might be slow motions, it might be something like that. So if you can learn all that and then apply it when you shoot, and again, what you want to try to do is get a show reel. So in other words, get a finished piece of film, not just a random collection of pretty shots, but a genuine, a sequence of behavior. It can be something fairly simple, a bird flying in, feeding its chicks, taking off, feeding itself. If you can get you can shoot a nice snappy thing like that, put that in your show reel, then people will look at it. Producers who will then give you a job as a camera person, they will look at it and think, this person knows how to shoot. They're steady, they're not waving all over the place. He's not just giving me a random collection of pretties. Anyone can shoot that. It's about thinking like a camera person. And I think that applies, with both. Every year I see new people getting into the business. So there are openings, but again, be prepared to write to people. There's a big wildlife film festival that happens every 2 years in Bristol called Wildscreen, which is happening this year. It's a good place to go and put names on faces. Be prepared to not just send your material to producers, but try to meet them face to face briefly, because look around for jobs as assistants, because these days wildlife camera people use assistants. And that, again, technical knowledge of the equipment, but also technical knowledge of how to download the cards that the camera records onto, all this sort of stuff. Being an assistant can be a valuable route into the thing. There's lots of info on the internet suggesting how you get into that. Don't just go to one reference, read many of them, and then you'll find that the salient points.
That's invaluable advice. Thank you very much, Doug. That really is.
Well, but one good thing, now that's come out of COVID is that there is increasingly seen as value in having a movie camera person based in the place that you want to do the filming. Because it's very expensive and not the greenest of things to fly your camera people from UK somewhere where there's a perfectly good camera person there. And COVID, with the lack of difficulty of travelling, that has meant that these foreign-based camera people have got more of a crack of the whip now than they used to have pre-COVID. And
that's very interesting.
Moving forward into the things. So if you're based in Ireland, it's an advantage. Can be an advantage. If you're listening to this podcast somewhere else, then it can be an advantage to be based in that country.
That's invaluable advice for wildlife photographers or aspiring filmmakers. I don't want to take your whole day, but have you any message for the people listening as to how humans can help nature, or what would you like to see that we can actually do? It's quite frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, it is frustrating. I think that we need to. You've got an awful lot of power in your finger, which decides where to put that cross in the next voting box, whether that's at a local election or a general election or whatever. Just go green. Vote. Give these green people a chance. At the moment, they're a small party. If we had proportional representation and not a first-past-the-post system, we would have far more green people on the edges of government and possibly in government than we do. One of the most exciting things in Scotland, where I hail from, is that the SNP, Scottish Nationalist Party, are now have a formal agreement, a coalition with the Greens in Scotland to make the biggest party. And I think a combination of SNP and Green is really going to drive that country in the right direction. So don't forget what you can do at that level, but just do the obvious things, move to a green electricity supplier, rather than a fossil fuel burner. If you can afford it, go for an electric car, change all your light bulbs, do all these things. But also look around for organisations at a local level that are doing good green things, whether they're cleaning up a river or planting some trees, stuff like that. These sort of organisations are dotted all over the place in every country. And find out the one who's doing something that it doesn't have to be maybe the most effective one in some respects, because some extent are more effective, but it has to be something that you want to do. If you want to get your hands dirty, then there's nothing better than clearing rubbish out of a river, out of a burn, or something like that. But get involved with the local things and be aware of where you can save energy. Do you have to buy so many new things? Lots of stuff you could buy perfectly good secondhand, and all the energy has gone into making those things. So when you buy them secondhand, that energy isn't used anymore. It's not needed, but at the same time, you're extending the life of that thing. So I think, buying secondhand would not only save you money, but you could get a perfectly good what you wanted, but at a much greener way of doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And go on to sort of the Done Deal or something if you're looking for a new juicer, and you'll find that people want to get rid of their juicers and just go for that one. So I think that's a very good way of putting it, very simply pushed, that you're saving the energy of making the new item. So, Doug, it's been amazing listening to all your stories, and you can hear more from Doug in the It's a Wrap tour that's touring around Ireland.
You've been very kind, thank you. I mean, I always like talking to people. I'm looking forward a great deal to the Irish tour. I'm talking at the Clifton Arts Festival on the 15th of September, and then my Irish tour starts on the 1st of November. and runs through until the 22nd. If you go to my website, which is dougallan.com, and that's DOUG, and the Allan is ALLAN, Alpha Lima Lima Alpha November, dougallan.com, then there's a little promo reel followed by links onto where you can get tickets to all the theatres that you want to go to. And like I say, I love touring, and I like touring in Ireland because people like to talk in Ireland, you know, and it's just great fun. And I love the venues that we've got lined up. I think I last did an Irish tour in 2016, I think, and we had some great audiences. And this is all new stories, you know, new clips, new funnies, etc., etc. And I'm really looking forward to it. But I also want to thank, you know, thanks a lot for the chance to be on your podcast, because you've got some fascinating people. I was just listening beforehand to the Pleistocene Park.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, that'd be great. Wouldn't you love to go and spend the summer with mammoths on the tundra?
Yeah, unbelievable. And I looked from our listeners, and they cut off Russia when the war started. So I had no listeners in Russia. And then I was delighted to see that Russia somehow popped up again, because, you know, we can't just tar the whole of Russia with one brush, so they can't listen to any podcasts.
No,
So,
I mean, the green thing has to carry on globally. You know, it really has to rise above it. You know, it was saddening to see, you know, China, because of a recent visit by American politician. China has decided not to cooperate with America on any of the climate things, and that's so short-sighted. You know, we need big collaborations. We need all of us to do what we can, but we need the big moves.
We need the big movers. So it's been an absolute blast. I enjoyed every minute of it. And I will see you at one of the shows. We're going to come and find you.
No, come and do that. And I must come down to Burren. You know, you're not that far from my place in Letterford.
Please do. Come and visit the Burren Nature Sanctuary, and we'll show you what we're trying to do here on a small scale.
No, that was great. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you. News from Burren Nature Sanctuary this week is that our apartment is now available for short stays and can be found on Airbnb in the Kinvara section under the title Relax and Recharge. Decorated in calm colours with natural timber elements, it's the perfect place to take some time to get away from it all. The king-size bed separates into twin beds for flexibility, and with a luxurious full-size desk and comfortable desk chair, you can even write that novel. We were delighted to welcome our first guest this week from the States, who have a week between weddings and need to work online and relax. With a dedicated mini kitchen, fresh coffee on tap in our cafe, and countless options for food in the village, everything is easy, and access to the 50-acre site with walks, farm pets, and a magical disappearing lake is sure to provide rest and recuperation. Reserve your slot now and get back to nature.